Dear learners, welcome to the MOOC course on Public Financial Administration. The topic for this lecture is Role of Fiscal Policy in Resource Mobilization. I am Dr. Shobana Karthikeyan, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Madras Christian College, Chennai. So, what are the learning goals of this program, of this course? So, we have the first topic is water resources. We talk about resource mobilization, a brief introduction of that, and resource mobilization that happens in the private and the public sector. But the scope of this lecture is going to be absolutely limited to resource mobilization in the public sector with particular reference to the fiscal policy. So, ways in which resources can be mobilized, the importance of this endeavor, and how exactly fiscal policy fits into this evolved purpose. Then we move on to talking about how public revenue is raised, which is majorly by two sources, the taxation and the non-taxation revenue, and we define the tax base. After that, we look at a circular economy and we define various points in which tax can actually be collected. This is a classic case of a hypothetical economy that we will be seeing, and then we discuss the different types of taxes and direct and indirect taxes and a general recap of what we have done in this class. So, what exactly are resources and why resource mobilization becomes important? So, let us just assume we have a small purpose in mind, a general personal thing that we have to do. So, we go about seeing what is the cash that is needed, what is the manpower that is needed, whether we have all the things that are, if we are even planning a small trip, there are a host of things that we actually think about, isn't it? So, an economy, a business, an individual is actually no way different. So, when you look at it from the perspective of an economy, you do see that resources are of various types. One, you have your natural resources which are intrinsically linked to the environment. For example, if you take the case of India, you have states like Orissa, Bihar, which are very high in mineral deposits. So, those are also vital resources which are important for the government. So, the next one is human resources. So, any resource that is encapsulated in human form largely can be divided into skilled and unskilled human capital or human resource. Skilled resources are that which require some amount of education, a lot of skill training that goes into it. For example, doctors, engineers, architects, teachers, lawyers, they all go through rigorous years of study to get to where they are. But if you talk about very generic skill set, manual labor, or these are called unskilled labor. So, human resources broadly can be divided into skilled and unskilled. Next, we move on to financial resources. So, this is very important. In an economy, it is important how much of cash is actually existing in the hands of the people. So, how the credit institutions are working, whether loans can be raised, and what are the types of investments that can be got into the economy. These are all the things that are very important, not only from an economic perspective but from a personal perspective as well. The next one is important. You are talking about the physical resources or the physical capital, the kind of machinery you have, the kind of buildings that are built, the kind of vehicles that ply on the roads, the kind of flights we have. So, all that will comprise the physical resources that are available in an economy. So, the next one goes to intellectual resources such as copyrights, patents, trademarks, trade secrets, all of that which require a certain number of years of research and development to be obtained by the owners. So, this is one. Technological resources can be this particularly is of major importance in today's times. When we talk about computers, you talk about software, the kind of programs you have, the kind of artificial intelligence algorithm, the kind of machine learning things that are happening around. Today, technological resources are very important, and that pretty much defines the direction in which any economy will take, and any economy will occupy the center stage in the world. So, looking at these types of resources, every economy goes through the need for certain resource mobilization based on the macroeconomic objectives of what is the kind of growth a country wants to achieve, with how much of employment is acceptable, how much of price rise is acceptable, and how positioned it should be as far as the BOP is concerned, and how much of the environment it actually wants to preserve and it has to preserve. So, based on the above objectives of any economy, the need for resource mobilization is important. So, any economy will want to diversify and expand resources. It will formulate and in order to do all of this, a budget needs to be formulated. Again, the utilization of resources becomes important, existing resources in addition to mobilizing more resources. So, utilizing existing resources is equally important. So, self-sufficiency today is important. So, whether it is mineral resources or it's human capital or equipments, it is important for countries to be dependent on itself and not on anybody else. So, this is the core essence of Atmanirbhar Bharat, if we can remember. So, sustain the nation and its policies, maximum use of domestic capital and skills so that skills don't go waste, and technically speaking, we are on the production possibility frontier. We are operating on the frontier where we put our skills to best use, our resources to best use. Next is you expand relations with the world. So, the country gains presence in the global map, and then fulfill its responsibilities of a welfare state to do good to the citizens of the country. So, for all this, in order to do allocation of every kind of public good that the country can think of, in order to reach welfare, parcel it out to its people, resources are of utmost importance. So, resource mobilization largely is domestic resource mobilization and international or foreign resource mobilization. This lecture restricts itself to domestic resource mobilization, and again resource mobilization can happen in the private sector also. You can talk about private organizations looking at venture capitals, bringing in more income, bringing in more investment from other nations, from their partners abroad, and there are lots of things by getting into joint ventures and every other thing, but this lecture is mostly about the public sector domestic resource mobilization with specific focus on the fiscal policy. Now, so here self-sustaining development is of utmost importance. That is why we are looking at domestic resource mobilization here. So, what we actually need here is a sound fiscal policy, responsible social spending, that we don't just blow up money on things which are not important while we have mouths to feed in an economy and basic core infrastructure to be set up. We don't go squandering money on things that are not important or things that can probably wait. So, a well functioning and a competitive financial system, because only if you have a wider and a deeper financial system, it will be possible for the country to raise resources from internal sources. Now, a point that we have to understand here is how the digital revolution in India actually has brought out a lot of people into the fulcrum of digital economy, or they have brought people into the fold of the digital economy. So, domestic resource mobilization hinges on these three important points. The next one, we are going to look exclusively at fiscal policy, and when we do that, fiscal policy largely is divided into four. One is the taxation part, the expenditure part, the investment and the disinvestment policy, or the buying and selling of assets, and the fourth one is managing of debt, which is very important. Debt, mostly it is not a surplus. So, debt management is the mainstay of the fourth wing of fiscal policy. Now, moving on to taxation. So, taxation essentially is about bringing a certain equitable system, some equity in the system. So, there are two things that we have to understand here. One is, if the tax is higher, it is going to sponge out the purchasing power from the hands of the people, right? So, this will lead to lesser buying, purchasing, therefore, it will lead to lesser investment, it will lead to lesser production. So, there is going to be a disincentive to spend, because there is not going to be much left for spending in the first case if taxation is going to be more. Exactly on the contrary, if the taxation is going to be less, then people are going to have a little surplus of money which they will go and spend in the market. So, which means that too much, there is going to be too much buying. So, there is going to be too much money chasing the same goods in the economy. So, that is going to lead to normal then higher levels of inflation. So, the tax system is important, a tax policy, a sound tax policy is important, because if the taxation is too high, then it kills any incentive to buy, invest, produce, and the income is going to go down. and if there's going to be a lower tax, it means you're putting in more money in the hands of the people. They're going to chase the limited amount of goods that are available in the market, therefore the inflation is going to go up. So there has to be a judicious mix of higher taxes versus lower taxes. That's one. Moving on to expenditure policy. So again, we are going to talk about capital expenditure, which is of a long term nature. Assets are going to be acquired for the economy here. So this will lead to a flow of income at later stages in the economy. So revenue expenditures are those that do not create assets, but they are much necessary for the functioning of the economy on the day-to-day basis. Invariably, revenue expenditures are those which the effect of which is finished within 1 year, and they do not lead to any buying of an asset. So that will be the broad category of revenue expenditure. Salaries that are paid to employees or anything else, the normal thing, in the normal course of running the affairs of the government, whatever expense goes on, that is the revenue expenditure. So the third part here, we deal with investment and disinvestment policy. So you're talking about, when you're talking about investment, you're talking about attracting investment into the country. When you're talking about disinvestment, you're talking about either selling the existing assets existing in the name of the government, either wholly or parceling some bits of it and selling it for private stake. So when we are talking investment here, it could mean foreign direct investment or FII. So when you're talking about disinvestment, you see which is the right candidate for disinvestment and whether keeping it in private hands rather than keeping it within the government fold, what is going to do good to the entity and to the nation at large? Those are the questions that have to be answered when you're talking about investment and disinvestment. The next one is debt or surplus management. So whenever there is an excess of revenue over expenditure, it's a surplus. Whenever there is a shortage of revenue and expenditure shoots up, it's a deficit. So in this case, the government can either borrow from foreign sources, or it can borrow internally, or it can go ahead and print money. So and to tide over the deficit, it could do anything. So debt management is the fourth arm of public policy. So looking at fiscal policy here from an expenditure side, there are certain things we also need to look at it from a slightly long term perspective. One, this is extremely important, particularly when we are talking about the impact of expenditure on important things, on social infrastructure such as education, health, general infrastructure and research and development. All these initially guzzle up a lot of money from the government, but after a certain lag, they pay back very rich dividends to the country, and this actually increases the earning capacity of the people, who in turn will go about and pay greater amount of taxes to the government. So this route of fiscal policy on the expenditure side is something that the government has to initially invest a lot of money in it, but it can reap rewards much later, right? Rich rewards later on, but there is a certain amount of lag in that. The next one is on the expenditure side, we also have to understand there are going to be direct impact on human development outcomes. At this point, it's very important to understand the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 interlinked global goals, which were signed by about 193 nations in the year 2015. It's also known as the 2030 Agenda. So it consists of 17 goals like zero hunger, gender equity, and better agriculture, and so many things put together, which all governments have to work towards. So this also can be bettered. We inch a little closer towards the Sustainable Development Goals when we are talking fiscal policy on the expenditure side. Investments in social infrastructure and physical infrastructure are extremely necessary for any country to inch towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The expenditure side, absolutely, on one hand, what we are actually trying to see is how to look at resource mobilization from the perspective of taxation and non-taxation revenue sources. So non-taxation revenues essentially are the money that are available from dividends and profits, fiscal services that the government gives such as stamp printing, currency printing, medal printing. We will also be dealing with currency printing, which is seigniorage, in a little while. So, interest that the government gets from investments made earlier. So, that is another one of the sources of non-tax revenue. The next one, you talk about general services that the government gives such as electricity, irrigation, banking facilities, insurance, and any other government services that the government gives. Next one is fines, fees, penalties, anything, absolutely anything goes to the government. The next one is grant the government receives from sources, national and international, anything from any source. The states can get a grant from the center, or the union government can get a grant from an outside source, or anything. All that will come under this one. There are few other things that we need to be seeing here as well. One is the fees, which is the cost of recurring services that the government provides. So, this is a compulsory contribution like a tax. So, if you do not pay for a particular service, you do not pay a fee, then the service is not rendered. The next one is a license fee. A license for anything such as operating a heavy vehicle, or operating your normal two-wheeler or four-wheeler, or opening something, starting an organization, anything, absolutely. There, depending on the nature of business, a license fee has to be paid. The next one is about fines and penalties. In the context of criminal law, the word fine is used. Penalty is something that you pay if a small is used in both civil and criminal cases. The next one is about escheats. When there is a transfer of an asset and there is no legal heir, so the proceeds go to the government, that is called an escheat. A forfeiture is something that happens when the contractual obligations are not honored. In that case, there is a forfeiture of an asset, then the government has the right to put up that sale, that asset for sale, or auction it and take the proceeds to itself. The next is for fees for communication services. This typically happens in the case of 5G or anything. You have license fees for telecom operators, which runs into several lakhs of crores of rupees. So, these are the basic sources of non-taxation revenue. The other one, very important, is going to be currency printing and seigniorage. So, whenever a government prints a currency, it actually makes a windfall profit, a huge profit. The profit is on account of the face value of the money and the cost of printing the money. For example, let us take that the government of India is printing a 2000 rupee note. The cost of putting the note together, the paper, the ink, and everything, the hologram, everything together, let us just assume it comes to about 4 rupees. So, the difference, which is 2000 minus 4, which is 1996 rupees, is going to be the profit that accrues to the government on account of printing that single one currency of a 2000 rupee note. So, this is something that the central bank earns and it is going to be transferred to the government. This is called seigniorage or currency printing. Now, so the higher the denomination of the currency, naturally the profit is going to be higher and higher, isn't it? But the case is different for metal coins, because metals are more expensive than paper. So, sometimes the government can even go for a loss depending on what is being printed. So, this will finish our non-tax sources of revenue. So, next, moving on to taxation revenue. So, what exactly is a tax? A tax is a compulsory contribution that people, it is absolutely obligatory if you fall under a certain bracket, that people and entities pay taxes to the government, and people cannot expect any direct or specific benefit from the government on account of a tax. It is a payment that has to be made if certain conditions are fulfilled. It is a compulsory contribution. Looking at certain elements of a tax is a compulsory contribution, a tax is imposed by the government, it is a legal imposition or it is a legal collection. A tax definitely involves an element of sacrifice, because otherwise if I were not paying so much of income tax, probably I would be taking a holiday, isn't it? So, there is an element of sacrifice that is associated with the tax. So, there is a social welfare motive, because eventually the tax is taken from somebody who can probably afford to pay a tax, much more than somebody who cannot afford to do it. So, the benefit is not the condition for payment. We cannot go ahead to the government, knock and say this has to be done because I am a taxpayer. No, the chance to voice out comes only through the political system once every 5 years, right? So, this will be the important elements of a tax. So, what is the impact of a tax? Let's first understand that the tax is essentially distortionary in nature. It distorts the will whether to work or not, whether to invest or not, whether to consume or not. Everywhere a tax essentially puts a little question mark whether to do a certain thing or not to do a certain thing. Therefore, there is an impact on the price of the good and quantity of the good, especially in the case of indirect taxes. There is a chance that companies actually shift the tax onto people or back onto their employers. They can shift it either backward or forward. So, there is definitely a hit on the price and the quantity that is produced and consumed. So, if there is going to be a huge tax on A4 sheets that are consumed, I will try to save up on A4 sheets and take e-copies instead, isn't it? So, it's a simple example, but however, there is going to be a difference, there is going to be an impact on price and quantity of goods that are produced and consumed in an economy. Next, there is an impact on economic growth. So, taxes or tax holidays will decide which way people and entities go, where the investment happens, where the employment grows, where the production is increased, so on and so forth. Next is impact on inflation. It in a way tends to keep inflation at check because tax is going to sponge away the excess money that is there in the hands of the people. So, there will not be a question, or there will not be a situation where people too much money chases goods in the economy. So, in a way it keeps the inflation in check. Impact on business location. Let us just assume that there is going to be a state that gives a tax holiday for any investment that is made within the boundaries of the state. A lot of businesses would actually move there. So, because it is going to be a temporary tax heaven for them. So, impact of it has a huge impact on where businesses are located also. Next is impact on social behavior. Just if we can think, if there is an incentive to wear a particular color on a particular day, right? If there is a government based incentive, I think we would all adhere. So, there is an impact on social behavior based on taxation. So, next we move on. Before we understanding any further on tax, it is important to know what exactly is a tax base. A tax base is the base, typically is the item or economic activity on which a tax is imposed. So, largely there are three types of tax bases. One is your income, next is consumption, the third one is wealth. Income generally is your income from salary, income from house property, income from any business run, any dividends, profits, anything that can come in, all that will become the total income of an individual or an entity. So, income is the first and foremost of criteria which is used in getting a tax done. The next one is consumption. Even if there is no income, a certain amount of consumption definitely happens because people have to sustain themselves. For example, people might buy dal or rice or soap or some basic medicines or anything. There is a certain tax, an indirect tax associated with most of these items. So, the consumption of a particular product or service becomes the tax base in that case. Let us assume that there is no income, but we are sitting on a huge pile of wealth, we have inherited a lot of wealth. In that case, wealth will become the base for taxation. It is also important for us to realize that income, consumption and wealth are highly correlated. So, if there is a greater income, there is a chance that we actually accumulate a lot of wealth and we will end up consuming more. So, the correlation is fairly high between these three. So, here it is important for us to understand what is going to be the fairness, what is going to be the criteria in the tax structure that is going to be in vogue in the country. Now we have seen taxes, we have seen certain non-tax revenues. So, this is just a little chart on from 2014-15 to 2023-24. The last one 2023-24 is the budget estimate, the others are actuals. The red one, the bar you see in the red are non-tax revenue and the bars in blue are taxation revenue. You will see that it is just about 8 to 10 to 11% of the taxation revenue. So, non-tax revenue is fairly minuscule when compared to the taxation revenue. So, these are some statistics and this is from the Government of India website. Next one is we see a circular economy here. So, we look at the impact of tax and the circular flow in a hypothetical economy here. So, here we see that there are households and then there are firms, these two are there. Next you have the factor market and you have the capital market here, and also you have the market for consumer goods, you have market for capital goods. So here government as an entity is going to jump in and tax at various points of activity. To just give you a quick summary, so there are the household income is here at point number 1. Household income is channeled into demand for consumer goods, and then whatever excess is routed through the capital market. This becomes the total receipts of the firms, that comes from the consumer goods market, and that which becomes the market for capital goods, and which also becomes the gross receipts for the firms. Out of the gross receipts for the firms, one part goes definitely into depreciation, because it has to factor for the things that are being depreciated at the business's end. The remaining outlay goes into paying the factors of production, which is the human factors and the profits. Eventually the factor markets get their money and it again goes into the households. So this completes the entire loop here. Now if we will see, where can the government enter and actually tax? It can tax household income, consumer expenditure, business receipts at point number 4, gross total receipts at 7. So business receipts net of depreciation at 10, the tax deducted at source at point number 11, profits are taxed at 12, the wage receipts at 13, retained earnings at 15, and capital income at 14. So each of these points of taxation is an opportunity for the tax authority to tax and skim some money out of it. Yes. So in this circular flow, the government can actually enter with a tax lenses and get a lot of money out of this. So this is the whole purpose of showing this diagram here. Now what are the various types of taxes we have? Taxes are the general individual tax that income tax that we pay. You have corporate taxes, you have taxes on capital gains. Let's just assume that 80 years back my great grandfather bought a property in the heart of the city. It was quite cheap back then, but then if I am going to sell it, it's going to be a humongous amount that I am going to make. So it's a clear case of a capital gain, so that is going to be taxed. The government is not going to let me walk away with all of that money. So there is going to be a tax on capital gains over there. The next one is your corporate income tax. We just saw that. You have wealth taxes, and then you have property taxes depending on the value of the property and the buildings that are built on the structure that is raised on it. And then you have estate tax. The difference between the estate tax is that estate tax is paid by the deceased individual's estate before the money is transferred. Inheritance taxes, you pay it and take the inheritance. So you have the sales tax, and today you have the GST. The sales tax is now subsumed by the GST. You have the excise tax paid on certain goods. Again, when we talk about taxes, there are certain pointers that we need to understand when it comes to taxation. So we are talking about a tax structure in the economy. The tax authority is there putting taxes on people. So people, entities to basically mobilize resources for itself. In that case, what are the characteristics of a good tax system that any tax system should have? So those are called the canons of taxation. The first person, the father of economics, Adam Smith, came out with the first principles of taxation as early as in the year 1776. The tax canons continue to be useful even today in the planning of taxation. So the canons of taxation that were put forth by Adam Smith are canon of equality or equity, certainty, canon of economy, canon of convenience. You had further economists who came in and who added more canons to the existing body of taxation. One is the canon of productivity, canon of elasticity, canon of simplicity, and canon of diversity. We will quickly skim through each of this. The canon of equality basically says that taxation should bring about a certain equality in the system. So it is not that, so if a certain group of people or the certain, for example, bottom of the pyramid people have to be let free of taxes, they have to be dealt with like that. And if there is anybody, a person or an entity who can pay a little more, it is only fair to tax them a little more than taxing the others. So essentially a certain equity or equality has to be bought in by the tax authority. The next one is the canon of certainty. While paying taxes, it is absolutely important as a taxpayer to know with certainty what exactly is the tax that has to be paid, when is it due, to whom it has to be paid, what is the method of payment. So, these things will actually bring in a lot of convenience. It will bring in a certain sanity into the taxpayer. As such, there is a sacrifice, then it should not be confusing, it has to be certain, it has to be clear. The next one is about canon of economy. Canon of, not too much should be spent in raising taxes. So, if the amount that is used to raise the taxes is much more, then it defeats the whole purpose of resource mobilization. So, the efficiency loss should be kept to a minimum generally. The next one is about canon of convenience. Depending on what kind of business it is, it should be convenient essentially. So, there is no point taxing somebody in the agricultural space before the harvest. Money will be realized. Of course, in India there is no agricultural tax, but I am just saying, it is just for an example to see how conveniently the tax should be inherently positioned. So, an agriculturist should be taxed only after the harvest, because that is when the surplus is going to come to his or her hands. The other ones are canon of productivity. No taxation should kill the incentive to produce or to employ or to do any activity. If a tax is going to skim off a huge portion of my additional work that I will be taking in, I will not have an incentive to work. So, then in that case you will say that the tax is counterproductive. So, it should not be counterproductive, it has to be healthy, the mix has to be judicious, just enough to let people work also, and just enough to skim some extra money as well. Next one is canon of elasticity. So, how much of a reduction or an increase will lead to an increase in the taxes or a reduction in the taxes or tax collection. So, elasticity speaks about the responsiveness of tax to a tweaking in the tax rates. So, it has to be elastic in nature. So, that is one of the important canons here. So, canon of simplicity, it should be simple. If even for filing my basic income tax return, if I have to take the help of experts, then the incentive to pay taxes regularly and be a good citizen and do my job and pay my taxes is going to be slowly killed. So, then people are going to evade, avoid and do multiple things. So, that also has to be reduced. The next one we deal with is about canon of diversity. So, diversification, the first thing that comes to our mind is, do not put all eggs in one basket. So, just 2 or 3 sources of tax revenues is not going to yield so much in terms of tax revenue for any economy. So, it has to be multiple sources, so that suppose even if one is not elastic, the other one's elasticity will make up and the resource mobilization can go on smoothly. Yes. So, these will be the canons of taxation. Canons of taxation essentially those that were given by Adam Smith, which is canon of equality, certainty, canon of economy and canon of convenience. The other economists put forward like the canons of taxation like productivity, elasticity, simplicity and diversity. Now, we move on with 4 important types of taxes which are levied on income. They are proportional tax, progressive tax, regressive tax and digressive tax. So, this one diagram will actually sum up how all these taxes really look like. So, if you will look at the diagram, a progressive tax, it is loosely said, progressive tax is something that any economy any tax authority should eye for. So, as the level of income goes on increasing, the taxation also should go on increasing, but then it can't infinitely go on increasing also. So, therefore, so progressive tax essentially states that as the tax base goes on increasing, the tax percentage or the rate of tax also goes on increasing. That is progressive. If no matter what the tax base, a flat percentage is going to be the tax rate, you are talking about a proportional tax rate system. So, a person who is earning 2000 rupees, if he or she has to pay 10 percentage, it is going to be 200 rupees of tax. A person who is going to earn 20,000 rupees is going to pay 2000 in tax. The rate is flat. A proportional tax rate is also called as a flat tax rate. The next one is a regressive tax. Regressive income tax we do not see in general, where as the income increases, there is actually lower tax It does not work in real life like that. But if you carefully observe, most indirect taxes are regressive in nature. Yes. So, for example, if we buy a packet of dal and there is going, or a packet of curd, there is going to be a 10% tax on a packet of curd which costs about 35 rupees. In that case, you will see the tax is going to hit the poor more than it hits the rich. So, indirect taxes are inherently regressive, but in real life we do not see regressiveness in terms of income taxes, right. So, the digressive tax, the fourth variety that we see here is actually the one which we see in real life, which is a combination of progressive tax and proportional tax. Till a certain part it gets progressive, but after a point it just tapers and it's a flat line. So, this is what we actually see in real life. So, just to give you a little brief, direct taxes we are looking at which are typically levied on income, we are looking at 4 types. One is the proportional tax or the flat tax, and progressive tax increases as the tax base or the income increases. Regressive tax is as the income declines. As the income increases, the tax actually declines. And the fourth one is digressive tax, which is a combination of progressive and proportional tax. The next type of taxes we see are indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are those that are levied on goods and services here. So, they are also called expenditure taxes. The reason for indirect taxes is to generate revenue for the government, to discourage consumption on harmful products such as cigarettes, alcohol, those are called sin taxes, and encourage the consumption of good products like more fruits and vegetables and things like that. So, taxes on goods largely are of 2 types. One is a unit tax and the other one is an ad valorem tax. Unit tax is also called a specific tax. When you talk about unit tax, it is not on the value, it is on the physical quantity of goods. For example, a gallon of milk or a liter of oil or anything. So, we are talking about specific, it has nothing to do with the value of the commodity. We are looking at the physical units, we are going to count the physical units and then apply a tax. That will be unit tax. So, unit tax, as the value of the inherent product increases, unit tax does not automatically adjust because the focus of the unit tax is on quantity and not on the value. The next type that we are going to see here is the ad valorem tax. The ad valorem literally translates into according to value. So, one advantage is that it automatically adjusts. So, there is a product which is 10 rupees. So, a 10% on it is 1 rupee. So, suppose the value of the product becomes 12 rupees, again it is 10%, it is 1.2. So, there is an automatic adjustment as far as tax revenue is concerned for the government. So, what are the challenges in India? We have seen taxation resources, we have seen non-taxation. So, what is the challenges that the Indian government or India faces in mobilizing resources? One, the tax base in India is extremely limited. So, we are about 140 crore people, isn't it? The data from the government of India shows that 7.4 crore people had filed their income tax returns in the year 2022-23. Of which 5.16 crore people or 70% of this bulk had zero tax liability. So, which means the only 2.24 crore people or in percentage terms it is just 1.6% of our entire population is actually paying income taxes, right. So, that is a seriously small number to consider considering the kind of population we have in India. The next one is tax evasion and avoidance is also an inherent problem that we have. So, tax evasion and avoidance is another huge problem. So, the difference between tax evasion and avoidance is that one is legal and one is illegal. So, the poor evade and the rich avoid. So, that is something that we generally think about. So, there is the financial system is still developing or it has to develop more. India has made leaps and bounds as far as the digital revolution is concerned, but still the financial system has to develop much more so that resource mobilization becomes easy. A huge problem as far as India is concerned is the presence of the informal economy, which does not fall under the tax umbrella absolutely. There are studies that say that the informal economy is as big, if not bigger, than the white economy in the country. So, just imagine the kind of resources that could have been mobilized if they were to come under the tax umbrella. The fifth one is inefficient resource allocation. It happens a government of this kind of a size with 140 crore population, inefficient resource allocation is definitely happening. If this can be improved, things can be tightened, then the challenges will be avoided to a great degree. So, this entire thing was about resource mobilization. What exactly are resources? So, how do we go about resource mobilizing based on the fiscal policy? We did see that expenditure plays an important part here, but the fruits that come out of public expenditure, investment in human development is going to take time. So, instantly we can use the taxation route. So, public revenue, generally taxation and non-taxation revenue, and then we moved on to see what kind of taxes that are there and what are the challenges in mobilizing resources in India. So, with this module will come to this topic on resource mobilization and fiscal policy comes to a close. I will be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.